Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first of the fall webinars for this new school season. These webinars are presented by the North American Cambridge Classics Project, or NACCP for short. And on our website, you'll find additional topics in the schedule for the balance of our fall series coming up. Jenny and I are just thrilled to welcome back Patrick Yaggy to get this season underway for us. He will be our guest presenter this evening, and as you know, he is doing a presentation on stages 6 and 7. He is a very frequent presenter for our webinars, and he's also a presenter at our Cambridge summer workshops and just does an amazing job every single summer. We are so glad to have him on our team. Patrick received an AB and an MA in Classics from the University of Georgia. He taught in Gwinnett County, Georgia for 17 years, and he's currently, as you can see on the screen, at Basis Tucson North in Tucson, Arizona. This is his 22nd year of teaching, and I believe his 17th year of teaching with the CLC. He's also chair of the ACL mentoring program. As you can see, we are recording this webinar. We will post the link in a few days afterwards on the NACCP website, which is cambridgelatin.org. And if you need a professional development certificate, if you will just email us training@cambridgelatin.org, I'll get that certificate to you very quickly. And Patrick, take it over.
All right. Thank you so much, Martha and Jenny, and everybody. I'm really excited to be here. This is hopefully perfect timing for you. You know, we're here and we're getting into the last part of September and early October, and that's usually when these two stages start coming around. So I'm hoping that this is really good timing for you. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm at Basis Tucson North. And just excited to talk about stages 6 and 7 with you today. I usually I test after every stage, but I have to tell you that sometimes I do group stages together, and 6 and 7 are really important to really consider almost as one unit, because they complement each other so well in a really important grammatical language element, which is the imperfect and the perfect tenses there. As I do with my students, and on my whiteboard that I use in my classroom to display schedules and things, I try to write goals. And so I'm hoping everybody that's here today, whether you're a new teacher or an experienced teacher or somewhere in between, I hope that you're getting certain things out of this. If you're a new teacher, I just hope that after this, you feel comfortable in 2 stages, that you feel, okay, I understand the content and I get the strategies, the pedagogy, that kind of thing. And I really do hope everybody, especially you new teachers, that you ask questions. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you, I can't see the chat because I'm sharing my screen, but Jenny and Martha will be monitoring the chat, and I'm hoping that we'll have some time at the end, especially to answer your questions. I even put out on our Facebook group, hey, what questions do you have about these stages? Let's talk about those. And I give Jenny permission, everybody, to interrupt me if something really pertinent comes up, and she can say, hey, Patrick, shut up for a second. Let's answer this question, and we'll do that, okay? Now, look, if you're an experienced teacher, I want you to bring your experience. I want you to, volunteer things that have worked for you in the chat. And I do hope that you find that one more thing, that those 2 more things that really enhance your teaching. I have to tell you, at my school, like Martha said, I've been teaching this for almost 2 decades. My colleague, this is her first year using it. And so every day we are having this discussion over email, and I can't tell you how many times this year my colleague, who I just adore, has said something And I thought, oh my gosh, I've never thought of that, right? That fresh perspective. So I hope that we can collectively as a team, new and experienced, really, really bring a lot to the table together. We are indeed talking about stages 6 and 7. So I wanted just really to start with the lay of the land here. Stage 6, we are talking, it's a course titled Felix, and this is after, this is named after the enslaved person Felix that Caecilius frees. And so we get discussion of servi and liberty and manumitio in stage 6. And then stage 7, we get a little bit of a Halloween vibe, a Lemuria vibe. We get a dinner party with a crazy story. We get a dinner party with someone who has died or maybe not. We get a dinner party with a ghost, and it really is a lot of fun. So yeah, stage 6. And I have to say, until I really sat down and looked at this for this webinar, I didn't realize everybody gets attacked. Everybody. There's a feral dog that's wandering the streets that's attacking all of our beloved characters. We go to the forum and there's an Agricola who is attacking a merchant. There's a fool that enters Caecilius's house in a flashback episode, a flashback story, and attacks a baby who we find out turns out to be Quintus. And Felix, who is the enslaved person there, ends up saving Quintus's life essentially, and so he is freed from that. And then we even have a bonus story where an Awaris is saved from an attack by his serpents. So all of this attacking everywhere makes for some really compelling stories. And that's the point, is that we want our kids to read and experience compelling Latin. And I think these are 2 great examples of that. Through all of this, we're going to get, and everybody, it's something like 58 examples. It's something like that through the stories alone. Forget about the model sentences, forget about the language. Even just in the stories, we're going to get 50 some examples of the imperfect and the perfect tense as we progress through that. And as we progress, like I said, through our culture of servi and liberty and manumitio. In stage 7, more attacking everybody. We get a werewolf that attacks somebody. We have a visit from an amicus who is thankfully not feral, but everybody, you experienced CLC teachers might know who this amicus is. And I have to tell you that perhaps, possibly in an upcoming edition, we find out definitely who this amicus is. It's Barbalus. If you could hear me there. We get we get a gladiator who is kind of feral. We get a ghost. I mean, it's just crazy. Melissa feels emotionally attacked by everybody, I think for good reason. And we get a sensitive moment with Metella, who is counseling Melissa, and a little bit of bonding there. And then we get even an au pair that's attacked by everybody, and the au pair appropriately, I think, attacks them. And then we get the addition of the perfect tense with some additional morphology there. And like I said, a lot of Halloween kind of stuff, which for me, for a lot of us, a lot of you out there, I think is perfect for this time of year. So that's the lay of the land, everybody. And I wanted to show you now a lot of what I'm going to show you here in these next couple of slides. These are just from the teacher's manual. And I'll tell you, 17 years into this thing, I still look at all of these on a regular basis. And I encourage you to do the same, just so that we're all on the same page. We started by looking at Caecilius's house. Then we looked at the daily life in Pompeii. Then we looked at business and the forum of Pompeii. We went to the theater. Now we're sort of back at Caecilius's house in looking at enslaved peoples and the practice of slavery and freedmen. And then, of course, looking at this dinner party that he's having and kind of the Halloween stuff. For language, this is a hugely important pair of stages, because up until this point, we've just been the present tense and really sticking mostly with the third person, although we do get, you can see in the 4th stage, we get the first and second persons, the I and the you. But yeah, this is just such an important and crucial stage. And to be honest, it's important that we Cambridge Latin teachers get this right. And again, pointing us back to the teacher's manual, looking at the objectives of the course, I want to make make a couple really important points that I know I have to kind of, every stage, I still have to reset and remind myself, okay, what are my goals here? What are my objectives? And notice, everybody, that really important word, comprehension, right? Our purpose here is teaching reading and comprehension of Latin, and doing that within the context of Roman history and Roman culture. Notice it's not about speaking, it's not about writing, it's about reading and comprehension of it. And so that's what everything is geared towards in the presentation, the really, really well-researched and thoroughly researched presentation of the language as we progress through our stories here. Look at that number 4, everybody. The course draws a distinction between knowledge about the language and skill using the language, right? So everybody, we're not talking about paradigms. We're not talking about charts. When we introduce the imperfect tense, we're not introducing bom, bos, bot, bomus, botus, bont. We're not worried about talking about the language. We're worried about using it. So we're just going to focus at the beginning on third person, bot and bont, wit, way room, and that's it. And we're going to keep that focus as we go through. So when we go through and our focus is on comprehension, reading skills, we're talking about comprehension questions. We're talking about vocabulary. We are not talking about memorizing paradigms. We are talking about translation as one of a set of skills, one of a set of strategies, but not the main strategy or the main goal, the main focus here. So I'm hoping with all of that, we can really keep that in mind as we get to stage 6 and as we look at Felix. And again, a broken record already. What am I, 12 minutes into this thing? I'm a broken record, everybody. Look at that teacher's manual, look at the objectives, and that will help you kind of frame everything that you do as we encounter these stages. So we witnessing a fight, see, everybody's attacking everybody here. And we get our main language features, we get our culture, we get our content. And hopefully, if we do our job right, we are going to infuse all of those things together. The storyline, the culture, the language, everything is infused together. As with almost every stage, everybody, we start with those model sentences. And I'll tell you my singular goal, everybody, every time we get to these model sentences, is to infuse that new language feature into my presentation of this, so that by the time we get to the about the language section, that it's old news. My goal, my purpose is to do this in such a way that by the time we get to that about the language is review. We already know it. Now it's just, okay, it's called this thing. So when we get to the model sentences here, and here, this is a really great example where we have them in pairs, right? 1 and 2. And for the imperfect and the perfect, we see, okay, we got some servi, and they were ambulabanting per viam. And I'm going to model this for them. Now, I have a couple things, everybody, a couple like big no's for myself. Since we're talking about these 2 tenses, one no, that is, I never use the word imperfect tense or the phrase. I never use perfect tense. And I never really even talk about those grammatical classifications. But what I will do is I will model these things for my students. So if I look at number 1, I'll say, hey, everybody, yeah, servi, right? Hey, look, we got 2 enslaved peoples in the picture. Everybody, who are they? And of course, everybody gets excited because one of them is Grumio, right? Sometimes students have a hard time realizing that that's Clemens, but of course we can see him down below, who, by the way, as a dog lover, it drives me nuts that he's punching a dog. Now, the dog may deserve it, or he might be fighting for his life, but it drives me nuts that he's like literally punching a dog. But, you know, I guess I get it, considering the dog is all over him in that 6 picture. But we want to set the scene, and I'm going to model without explicitly acknowledging the tense shift. I'm going to model it. Hey, everybody. Okay, yeah, we've got Grumio and Clemens. Okay, what were they doing in this picture? What were they doing per viam? And the students will say, oh, they were walking. The students don't even realize they're using that past progressive because I'm modeling it for them, and I'm going to keep modeling that for them. And then subito, look at that number 2, everybody. My students think that my favorite word in Latin is subito, and it is because of this picture. I don't care about subito. It's a fine word. I have nothing wrong. I have nothing against the word, but I make such a big deal about it because it's so effective in showing you, okay, this was happening, this was happening, this was happening, this was happening, and then suddenly this happened, right? So now I'm modeling, okay, and then subito, this dog is here, and everybody, what did the dog do? And the kids will say, oh, it barked. And I'm kind of hoping that one of my students or a couple of them will go, woof, and I want them to actually bark, right? But I'm modeling that vocabulary or modeling those tenses here. 3 and 4, right? He was afraid of the dog, right? So I'm modeling that. Okay, how was he feeling? Well, he was afraid. And what did the cook then do? He clamouted. Hey, everybody, did he say, did he whisper, did he shout? But I'm saying did, because I'm modeling that tense. And when we go on into the next kind of set of sentences, we have really the same thing there. Hey, here's Quintus. Everybody, hey, what was Quintus doing down the street? Of course, he was ambulabotting. Of course, he was walking, because we just saw that in the previous picture, right? Ambulabant. And then subito, now it's not there, is it? But I'm going to go ahead and do it. Subito, what did our Eunice do? Well, he heard a shout. Well, the conus was wexaboting. Everybody, what was he doing? And I got to tell you, with this one, this is a really good discussion, because if you look up wexabot in the back of the book, if you look up wexat, you'll get the word annoy. This is a really good example, a really good excuse for you to say, okay, let's practice some context here. Look at what that dog is doing. He is gnawing on that guy's knee. I mean, he is really going to town on the guy's knee. He feels like Quintus has got to come and beat that dog back with a stick. Do you think annoying is probably the right translation? So I'm going to keep modeling the was blanking. Was he annoying him? No. Was he vexing him? Was he bothering him? Okay, that's a little bit better. But notice that I keep putting in the repetition of that imperfect translation. Hey, everybody, what did Quintus do? Quintus hit him. Pulsawit. So we keep modeling those verbs. I have never once told my students the word imperfect. I have never once said the word perfect. I have never talked about tense. I'm just modeling that stuff. And we're going to, as we get through the stories, keep doing that. Now, again, from the teacher's edition, this is from the first part where we're talking about model sentences in general. And I'm not going to go through this with you, but I wanted you to see it because it basically talks about what I just did. But I want you to see that these are good general practices for how you handle those model sentences. And I have to tell you, I've had situations where I was able to do all of this in Latin, right? Speaking 80% or more in Latin in the class, and you can do this as well. I have to tell you though, specifically with stages 6 and 7, because we're talking about tense, I have tried in my 17 years of doing this, I have tried to find, let me go back here. I have tried to find creative ways to deal with communicating these tenses. I've even pretended, and I've taken my whiteboard markers and drawn on the board, and I pretended I was painting. Okay, I was painting, and then I drew this, or I did this, or I did that to try to model the sort of past progressive idea matched with the simple present, right? That momentary thing. I have to tell you, everybody, at least for me in my classroom, it really does work better to just keep working with that translation, to simplify it and just say, eventually when we get to the about the language, ba means was blanking. V means blanked. And after various permutations of trying to find the best way to connect my students to those things, I found simpler is better, and just working with those simple translations there. So getting back to stage 6 and looking at the model sentences again, if you read through this in the teacher's manual, you're going to see This is a lot of what I'm doing. Look at that first reading explanation. Hey, what were the slaves doing? Remember, that's exactly what I said. Hey, what were these enslaved peoples doing down the street? Well, they were walking, they were ambulabanting. And by the way, everybody, I'm pretty big on what I call Langlish. So you got the Latin word ambulabant, and I'll say ambulabanting. And for some reason that really connects with my kids. I don't know why, but it helps cement those goals in there.
Patrick, we have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Michelle says, another teacher has pointed out how these model sentences are a good moment to show how the narrative depicts the free person, Quintua, I guess that's how you say her name, in contrast to the enslaved people, modeling their language and the culture, modeling the language and the culture.
So who is the
Michelle, jump in and tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah.
I just was saying that in a previous, maybe it was an ACL Institute, another teacher who's a CLC user uses the model sentences as an opportunity to talk about the difference in depiction between Quintus as the freed person versus how the slaves are depicted as enslaved people, right? So Quintus is the hero. He comes in and swoops in and saves the day, and the enslaved people are depicted as kind of grateful that he's come along to save them, right? And so not only do the model sentences model the language features that are found in the stage, but they also explicitly, and maybe it's not on purpose, but maybe it is, model the culture that the book also talks about. So, you know, you can hit not just the language features in going over the model sentences, but also the culture too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point of all of these images throughout the entire course. It's the images, the illustrations, it's all of it that is connected. And you're absolutely right. It is both the language and the culture. And that's why those images are so important to spend a lot of time on.
And everybody, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know that I've ever fully really developed that idea that Michelle is talking about with this, where Quintus saves the day like 7 times during the series, right? And I've never really fully, I think, kind of developed that idea, but Michelle, I think, is right here, right? That Quintus, the freed, the citizen, is sort of coming to the aid of these enslaved peoples. And one thing I do really appreciate about our curriculum as a whole is that we don't shy away from these really tough conversations, right? We don't shy away from things like slavery. I just taught in my one of my upper classes, it's a Latin 3 course at my school. We just talked about Masada, right? That's a brutal, it is hard to talk about that. And I was giving, I gave trigger warnings to my kids. I said, look, if this is too much, get up and go to the bathroom, and, that's fine, take a moment. But we're not shying away from those things. And I think it's important to acknowledge them. So I thank you, Michelle. That's great. And again,
just to give credit where it's due, that was Tom DiGiulo's presentation that I had heard that from. So it's not my idea, it was his, but we borrow from each other all the time, right?
And he's great, isn't he? He's fantastic. Gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. Thank you. And everybody keep chiming in with those, keep chiming in with comments and questions and all of that kind of thing. I love it. I love it. I want to circle back to what I said before about those model sentences before we kind of leave this, is that again, my students, it's almost a running joke in my class after a while, because they know that they know it's a game. They know that I'm trying to impart something in them with, about the language without telling them what it is. So by the time we get to most of the way through the year, the model sentences pop up and my kids kind of look at each other and like, okay, what's he getting at this time? And I love that. What is the point that I'm trying to get them to really, really internalize here? What is this game? And I want my students to figure it out. If you tell me something, I have a terrible memory. I'll be honest, I'm probably not going to remember it. But if you lead the horse to water and leave it up to the horse to decide to drink from the water, I will probably remember how to get to that water. So I want my students to interact, to get involved, and to figure it out on their own, with me, of course, leading the way through just a ton of examples. And that is the same with these stories, everybody, with Pugna, okay? When we are seeing these stories, and again, a good rule of thumb here, it doesn't matter if we're talking about Pugna, it doesn't matter if we're talking about stage 6, whatever stage, whatever story, I really encourage you to take 2 or 3 runs at the story. Give it a pre-reading. So here, just recite it out loud and have the students do something while you're reciting out loud. Have them have a piece of paper, blank sheet of paper, and just write down what they're hearing. And just little notes. What do they hear? What characters? What are they doing? And give them, and just get a general idea. Maybe go back to it a second time, and you could do like basic comprehension questions. With this story, I always think it's a very visual story because it's a fight that's happening in the story in the forum. So have them draw a cartoon of it and give them a sheet of paper that's got 6 blank panels and say, make a cartoon of this. Now, again, when you're doing this, when you're communicating and interpreting and mediating the story with your students, you want to make sure that you're putting that emphasis on those imperfect and those perfect verbs. So, hey, what was Clemens doing in that first line? Ambalabant, right? Hey, what were the Seri and the Ankali doing? Kiba Mebema. Yeah, they were eating the food. What were those Pistores doing? They were selling the bread. And when I'm reading this out loud too, I want you to know, everybody, because I'm in that pre-reading mode, I am not just reading it, I am acting it out. Clemens was walking down the street, right? There was a Maxima Turba in the forum. They were Eme Bonting, Kibum. And I'm trying to really model all of that kind of stuff. And I keep repeating those tenses because, of course, the tenses are the important language element here. Same thing with Felix, okay? We've got tons of examples of the imperfect and the perfect tenses in that story. In fact, I'll show you something in a second that will really prove it. With Felix at 4, this is everybody, this is at the dinner party. And you can see up here, Quintus asks his dad, well, hey, okay, so how has it become that Felix is now a liberatus, right? That he's now free. So Caecilius says, hey, let me tell you a story. And so he tells the story about this fooler entering the house, and Felix fights him off, and Felix is then freed through some, probably rather informal manumissio, but he becomes freed. There again, there's a great cartoon worksheet on Activity Masters. There's a reenactment video that you can get through Elevate, and a bunch of really great ways to interact with the story. In fact, let me see if this earlier wasn't loading, but it looks like it finally loaded now. So
Felix olim in tablino scribebat. Felix erat solus. Clemens et grumio cibum in foro quaerebant. Metella aberat. Quod sororem visitabat.
Now, we're not going to listen to the whole thing, although I'm going to fast forward it because I want you to watch one little part at the end that I always find funny. But it's a great pre-reading, and it gets them hearing it, and it gets them seeing the visuals here. You can see, he's got him narrating, but we've got some visuals.
Fur pariano am intravit. Fur tacite atrium spectavit.
I love how he whispers, Takite. I love that. Okay, we're going to fast forward simply because I want you to watch one of the weirdest parts of the reenactment videos, but I just love it, and the students love it too. Watch the laugh. Here we go. He says, Quintus says, well, who was the baby? Because Quintus doesn't know the story is about him. And he says, well, quis erat infans?
Dinfans. Quintus.
That cracks me up every time. Everybody, if you haven't watched these reenactment videos, they are a treasure. I mean, just every one of them is wonderfully amazing and also kind of terrible at the same time. They're just wonderful and they're memorable. My AP students want me to go back and play those videos. It's amazing. It's amazing. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Oh shoot, I hit the wrong button. There we go. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so here is the Activity Masters worksheet, and it's the cartoon of Felix at 4, and they're putting captions in it. So another example of a way that you can interact, your students can interact with the story. And again, here we finally get to the about the language, everybody. We've read like 3 stories, right? We've had the model sentences in 3 stories. The point that I always try to get to is my students should know the language concept by the time we get there. Like if I've done my job, my students already get it. And this is just consolidation. It should just be naming it. So look back at Pugna, everybody, and I've underlined, look at how many examples of the imperfect and the perfect there are. Look at that. Look at the next story. Look at Felix. How many examples? And if I'm doing my job, I am taking advantage of every one of those examples. What did Clemens do? He entered the shop. And here it's really a tavern, a bar. What did Clemens shout? Subito. There it is again, everybody. Okay, so I'm modeling those, and by the time we get to about the, here's Felix at Fur, look at that. I mean, and there are literally like something like 58 examples of these 2 tenses. So by the time we get to about the language, it's consolidation. It's naming the thing that they already know. Now, again, just some tips and tricks that teachers have relied on for the imperfect. I don't want my students to know the full paradigm, bomb, boss, spot, bomb, spots. I don't want that. I want them to know ba equals was blanking. That's it. Everybody, the best thing that Cambridge does is it takes language points that can be very complicated and makes them a kernel, makes them bite-sized, makes them 1 sentence. The only thing I want my students to know is ba equals was blanking. Some of you are already going, well, but if it's plural, that means were blanking. Yeah, of course, right? I don't need to explain that to my students because I know if I say they was blanking, my students will go, Mr. Yagi, it's they were blanking. Ba equals was blanking. V equals blanked. And every example in this stage is a V, and that's it. Okay, now we do have est, and I'll go to the next page. We have, we're gonna get to this in a second. Hang on, we'll come back to that. We get est and erat. So we have est and sunt, we know that. We have erat and erat. Now look, the verb to be is irregular. Y'all, we're gonna treat erat and erat like completely different vocab words. We're gonna treat those words just like we do in our native languages. They're different words. We're gonna treat them like different vocabulary words. However you decide to assess vocabulary, treat est, sunt, erat, and erant as 4 separate words. Est equals is, sunt equals they are, erat equals was, erant equals were. They're different. They're 4 different words. We don't have to worry about a paradigm. We don't have to worry about matching them together. They're 4 different words. That's it. Okay, want to go back. One of the ways, and again, my colleague here at my school showed this to me. I had never seen this before, and it just cracks me up. It cracks the kids up, and I'm going to show it to you. There is a guy on YouTube called Rap Teach, and he has an imperfect song. Now, I don't show the whole thing because it does get into very kind of paradigmatic kind of things, but it's just funny. So I show the kids this, they get a kick out of it, and it helps them remember ba equals was or were blanking. Uh-oh, what happened? Let's see, let's try that again.
Learn the imperfect, cause it is worth it. If you're uncertain, if you were doing something, learn the imperfect, cause it is worth it.
Okay, let me fast forward here for a second. And of course let's see. Oh, shoot. Let's see. My window that's showing me everybody's picture is in the way of my fast forwarding. So let me try it now. Here we go.
Those are the endings you better practice. That's the imperfect and it's active. Those are the endings you better practice. That's the imperfect and it is active. Take the infinitive, the end.
Okay. So, we don't want to do the whole take the stem and all that, because we don't care about that. But I show them the whole bomb, boss, spot, bomb, spot to spot, because it just infuses that ba sound with the was blanking sound. And again, the kids get a kick out of it, and that's what it's all about. Boy, we couldn't get away from that video if we tried, could we, Martha and Ginny? It just keeps coming up. So anyway, we come back to the book here. We have practicing the language, and everybody, if you're not sure about kind of the reasoning and the methodology behind the practicing the language, usually there are 2 or 3 exercises. Usually one of them is practicing the current language concept. Usually one of them is practicing a related language concept from previous stage. So here we have the Awara story, and there are a ton of imperfect and perfect examples yet again. And we have comprehension questions, but look at the first question: who was hurrying, right? So we're infusing the language into those content questions there. Here is the second one, and it is about singulars and plurals. So it's a concept that is a couple stages old, and kids might need to have that kind of cycled back in to their language practice. Now, everybody, I want to point out the culture section at the end, the culture essay. Well, it's information. We got to put it somewhere. We decided to put it at the end of the stage, but I want you to know, if the way I view it is this, and I hope you do too. If I'm doing my job, I am infusing the culture all throughout the stage, from day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and we are talking about it nonstop within the story and everything that we talk about every day. I don't want to treat this by itself. I don't want to treat this as its own thing. We had to put it somewhere in the stage, so we put it at the end, right? But I don't want you to wait until the end of the stage and just treat it as its own kind of separate entity there. And so that's what I want to say about that. Now, there are some reading comprehension questions on the activity masters, and you can use those. But if I'm doing my job, by the time we get to the end of the stage, we've learned a ton about this content every single day. Again, the only note that I want to make here about the vocab checklist is the methodology. These words are here because they've shown up a bunch. They're high frequency words, and teachers have a variety of ways of assessing them or not assessing them. I'll tell you, in my AP class, one of the best changes I've made in 15 years of teaching class, or whatever it's been, is we start every single class period with a GIM kit, with the GIM kit / Kahoot. Those, hopefully we know what I'm talking about. And already I can tell you, 7 weeks into the school year, that's the best change to that curriculum I have ever made. And I'm starting to think, hey, maybe I should do that every single class, every single period. And maybe that even supplants my normal routine, which I've done for 15 years, which is I give a vocab quiz. But you know, a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about how to assess vocabulary, or even to assess vocabulary. The one caveat, the one big no-no that I want to tell you about this is, notice in that list, you've got abest. Please don't make them learn like ob sum, ob esse, a fui, right? Like, don't pull those principal parts from Oxford Latin Dictionary and make them learn that, because there's no point. Notice cubiculum, bedroom. Y'all, don't make them learn cubiculum, cubiculi, neuter. They don't know what neuter is. They're not going to see it until stage 16 or something. They don't know what the genitive is. They're not going to see it till stage 17 or 18. Don't do that. It means cubiculum. That's it. That's all we need to know. And it's that piecemealing, that apportioning out into those bite-sized chunks that makes this such a great curriculum. So when we get to 7, and please know I'm not going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb like I did stage 6. I really do want to leave us a bunch of times to have questions and talk through issues and all of that kind of thing. But notice, you know, I start looking at the teacher's manual again, and I get the lay of the land, I get the storyline, I look at the culture, and I think about trying to infuse all of that in to what I do every day. But the methodology, everybody is the same. Oh, did someone have a question?
No, that was my stupid iPad.
Oh, okay. All right. No worries. Okay. So here again, I left it to the end in the stage 6 discussion. I put it at the beginning just to kind of prove the point that I've said a couple times already. This should be everywhere, everybody. Life after death, we're talking funerals, we're talking ghosts, we're talking, Lemuria, all of that should be every single day. Same thing, everybody. Look at this. It's the same exact thing. We are talking about the imperfect, talking about the perfect tense, and notice same methodology as in 6. Look at this, numbers 1 and 2. Someone was doing something, then something happened. Caecilius was waiting for his friend. He greeted his friend, right? So imperfect, perfect, imperfect, perfect. Notice the wrinkle here. Look at that second sentence, everybody. The subject is implied, right? Hey, the friend was visiting Caecilius. Hey, everybody, what was the friend doing? Oh, he was visiting Caecilius. Hey, what did the friend do? Whelam and Trot. Oh, he entered the house. Hey, Caecilius, what was Caecilius doing here in that second picture? Oh, he's waiting for his buddy. Hey, what did Caecilius do? And oh, he greeted his friend. So the language feature here that I'm already trying to infuse in my students is that inference and that ellipsis of that subject there, because we have the context of the sentence and of the paragraph or what have you, something that we do naturally in our native languages all the time. So more of the same here. We got the imperfect and the perfect, but notice, everybody, look at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In fact, do we even have no, we don't. Every single one of these is perfect tense, but look, inspects it with an X, but then it's paired with the V. House it, that stem change with the V then in the second sentence. Look at 7, plouse it with the S, deeks it with an X. Then we got biberunt, sorexerunt. We're throwing those in there now. Now, stabant with aperuerunt, deeks it, discuss it. Now we're seeing those different morphological expressions of that perfect tense. And the whole time I'm just going, hey, what did the friend do? He drank from the cup, or he drained the cup, he emptied the cup. Sometimes the students say he chugged the cup, chugged the drink. So we get to Fabula Mirabilis, we get those same, look at all of the perfect and all of the imperfect examples in here. And again, mostly perfect, because that's what this stage is all about. You've got a reenactment video you can use. You've got an activity masters worksheet you can use. I like to use, here is an activity masters worksheet as kind of a consolidation piece. I like to use pictures, and I got to tell you, credit where credit is due. My boy from Georgia, Keith Toda, the man, the myth, the legend. His PowerPoint videos are legendary. These are his drawings from probably 20 years ago. I still use them, and I use them in a variety of ways. These are his drawings from this story. I might say, hey, everybody, put them together. Or hey, everybody, write Latin captions, or find the sentence in the story that captions this picture as consolidation tactics for maybe the second or the third reading of this story. Now, again, we go to about the language. And by this point, I'm hoping that they've understood. And I have to be honest, in my experience, everybody, the kids get this. The kids get that just like you do in your native language, we infer the subject when we don't need to say, I don't need to keep saying Grumio did this, Grumio did this, Grumio did that, Grumio did this. We can infer it. It's okay. And hopefully that's a really natural thing for your students to pick up on in Latin as well. Grumio was working in the kitchen. He was preparing dinner. The actors were shouting in the theater. They were putting on a play. So I don't typically feel like, or I don't feel like typically my students have a hard time with the ellipsis of that verb, the omission of that, or sorry, of that subject. For decans, again, we have a lot of great examples. I'll tell you, everybody, in most stages, we have what essentially is a play, right? We have characters and they're saying dialogue, and I love to have my students act this out. And I think, Michelle, we were talking about this at the beginning. This story in this stage basically is Caecilius throws a dinner party, and in the dinner party, let me go back here to the previous story. He says, hey, Decans should be here. Where's Decans? He's not here. And everyone kind of goes, oh, I don't know. So he sends out an enslaved person, I think, to go find him. And there's this story. And meanwhile, while they're while they're going to find Decans, Felix drained his cup. And then the Libertus told this story. He told a miraculous story. So we get this story within a story, essentially about a werewolf, a centurion. When the story is over, the Decans here were on to this story in the stage. After Felix told the story, everybody applauded. And then all the guests were silenced. They were waiting for another story. And then they heard a shout. And we get this whole farce that Caecilius, and I guess it's just a joke that he's playing on his guests, where Decans, this man he's invited to dinner, has disappeared. And he gets these people to come back and tell this crazy story about how essentially Decans was murdered by this like ghost gladiator guy. And Metella ends it by going, oh, I get it. That gladiator, that was Pugnax. He was a really famous gladiator who died in the arena once upon a time. He was an Umbra. An Umbra killed Decans. Now, look, I don't know about you all, but my students typically, they go, okay, all right, all right, that's fine. Great story, Halloween, all of this. We get to the next story, everybody, and it's after dinner. Now, I'll tell you, we talked about translation being one of those things that you could do. This is a short story. The language is not very complicated. The vocabulary is not very complicated. I usually have my students translate maybe even just a half of it, but I usually have them translate and practice that skill with this story. But at the end of the story, everybody leaves the house and they're all freaked out. I mean, they think someone's been murdered. They're going into a dark street. I mean, this is terrifying. If this is Caecilius and Metella's joke, I mean, they're terrible. I mean, this makes me wonder if they're just actually good people at all, because what a joke to play on these people. Oh my goodness. But look at the bottom here, everybody. Everyone's freaked out. They're going home. Look at the last sentence. Caecilius and Metella didn't hear a sound. They didn't hear a shout because they were sleeping in their bedroom. Usually my students are like, what? And this is when we have to kind of talk about, okay, everybody, Decans, and I don't know, Jenny, Martha, you all, do we think that Decans actually did exist, or he is like just not even really a friend? He just is, oh, I invited my buddy Decans. No one knows him, but I invited him. What do you all think?
Oh no, I think he existed. I think he's in on the joke in the model sentences where they're smirking about it.
That's
yeah. I also think that we act like this is such a horrific story, and then we have Halloween 13 and Scream 5 and all those kind of horrible things, and they didn't have that. So in a way, to be a prankster and do this, and the next day find out that Decans is in the forum with everybody else, and you stinkers, what did you do? I mean, I think it goes that way. But by the way, I was slow to catch on to this. I was one of those people that needed Joe Davenport to explain in slow English what was actually going on here.
That's right. And you're right. Wouldn't it have been so funny if later the next day, Caecilius makes sure that he's like hiding on the side of the forum and Decans is there, and the people like,
Decans, you're not dead.
I think it would help if we ever met Decans before this story. Like if it was a character that we knew and cared about, it would be more like impactful. But we're like, who the heck is Decans? And we never see him again.
Yeah,
Do you know what this reminds me of when sitcoms first came out? Apparently the people who were developing them didn't think that the audience needed any continuity. So they'd have an episode that was fall and then another episode was summer. And I grew up with that, but we would always be like, wait, wasn't it Christmas last week? And now they're in bathing suits. And it was the audiences pushing back, apparently, that finally made that shift in TV shows to say, all right, this guy has to be the same person every week, or this has to be the same, you can't have this policeman married this week and then 5 weeks later he's not married, So I think it's that same kind of thing. They just wrote this story and thought, oh, this will be really clever. And we would like to know, who the heck is Decans?
Right. Yeah.
You should be like in stage 3 when we meet all those merchants from other places. They should have had a Roman merchant too,
He could be Barbalus, actually. That's who it should be.
That would be fantastic. And I have to tell you, you know, everybody, this is where you can really start getting into that culture narrative about communing with your dead ancestors, right? Like, you know, talking to interacting with your ancestry and going and celebrating the Lemuria and all of that. I mean, I think these are perfect excuses to really talk about that aspect of the culture as well. Now, everybody, I don't want to take up, I want to, again, leave us a little bit of time, but I want to make sure, because this is definitely something that has been talked about and teachers have talked about having issues with this. Remember last stage, perfect was V. V equaled blank, right? Well, now we find out, oh, it's not just V, it's S, it's X, it's U. And then we even have, oh my goodness, we have fuck it, fake it. I mean, what is going on here? So early on in my career, I gave my students the sort of mnemonic V sucks. Now, as I get older, I get more sensitive, I guess. I've abandoned that. I do Superman has X-ray vision as the mnemonic device for my students to recognize that, hey, it's not just V, it's U, it's S, it's X. And I even, you know, you can see here, I even put a macron over that U because I do acknowledge the vowel shift there. Several of you have commented, this is where my students get tripped up. If your students are having a really hard time getting this idea, my first comment is, welcome to the club. When you're learning your native language, you have a problem with this as well. You're seeing a microcosm of a very human thing. And that's why this is reinforced over and over and over and over again over the next, like, you know, 5 stages through the end of the red book here. So if your students are having trouble, maybe just reassure them, like, yeah, you probably, if you're kind of a normal human being, you probably should be, you know, needing a lot of reminding and a lot of examples of this. Now, with that said, one of the solutions is just like, remember how I told you treat est, sunt, erat, and errant as 4 separate words? Treat apparet and apparuit as 2 separate words. Treat decit and dixit as 2 separate words, right? I mean, this is how we internalize these different tenses in English or in your native language. My goodness, my very wonderfully gifted and talented and smart and amazing juniors and seniors, y'all, they still can't spell the past tense of lead, L-E-D. Right? This is a running joke in my class that, you know, they still have a hard time with it. So, you know, maybe one answer is to treat them as separate words, and maybe even give them a quick vocab quiz and treating them as separate words. The one thing I wouldn't do definitely is, and I've heard some talk about this, is, okay, you're having trouble with seeing these morphological changes. So let's expand our grammar and let's look at the big picture and let's talk about vowel oblauts and let's talk about how, you know, let's talk about paradigms. Please don't do that. Simple, simple, simple. Simple is better. If they're having trouble with fuck it, fake it, it's 2 vocab words. Fuck it means he does, she does. Fake it means he did, she did. Separate them out, keep it simple. But please don't go back to, you know, Wheelock and pull out, you know, grammar examples and all of that kind of thing. So we have yet more stories here. We even have an additional story, the animal Farox from the Practicing the Language. We get some comprehension questions there, and we get the Practicing the Language in stage 7. And you can see here, practicing those concepts, singular, plural, vocabulary, singular plurals again with that number 3 there. And then we get, of course, our vocab checklist. Now notice, everybody, in our vocab checklist for 7, cannot, canawit. Now we're given the present and the perfect. This is not, I'm a broken record, aren't I? Everybody, Martha, Ginny, I'm a broken record. This is not your cue to go, oh, let's go. Kano, kanare, kanawi. Please don't do that. Please just say no, okay? Just give it to you as Cambridge gives it to you. Give it to the students as Cambridge gives it to them. Okay, fuck it, fake it. No fakio, fakra, fakey, factus, none of that. just that if you want them to know this vocab, stick with these 2 words. Okay. So again, kind of my summary there, but I wanted to open it up and give us a little bit of time to talk through, difficulties and stuff like that. So I'm going to leave that on the page, but Martha, Jenny, can you maybe curate some of those questions and things in the chat? Let's talk.
Yeah, Nora, why don't you share your mnemonic? That's a good one too. Nora?
Maybe she thinks she's talking.
Wonder if it's
No, it's okay. It's just, I got it from someone else, and I think it covers a number of them, right? SUV and XC are a lot of the, so, I mean, it can be helpful just to touch on, but I wouldn't focus on it, right?
what's the mnemonic?
Right.
Oh, it's in the tracks. It's in the chat. SUVs are the perfect cross-country vehicle, right? So you've got SUV and XC.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
I like it a lot.
Yeah, both of you. Those are both good ones.
That's great.
Michelle wrote here the idea that to hold off on assessing for mastery. And I think that is really very important, because if you just kind of casually keep working with the B, A, and V, and then the next chapter, you let those other letters show up and just start to realize that even if they don't really know they're perfect, they know that the story's got a lot of EDs and it doesn't have a BA. So, and then let it just become much more familiar, and maybe do little assessments or little either gimkits or something that just reinforce that this is the ED form,
So Dylan, what is your question about the Deccan story?
So can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm rather new. This is the start of year 4. And every time I've done the story, I always just took it at face value, like it actually happened.
We've all been there, done that.
And I like the conversation that can occur, especially with the citizen versus enslaved person dynamic of, did he actually get murdered by a ghost? And why perhaps would they make up this story? So my question is, what is the recommendation? Do you find a better reaction when you make it like a silly joke that Caecilius and Metella are doing, or do you like kind of pretending that this actually happened and now Clemens has to help his 2 friends out?
We're covering for someone's tracks because we really don't like Deccan, so we offed him.
I don't know.
I'm glad you said that, because I've thought about that too. I think that's come up, but I think they're just playing a joke. They're playing a joke on their guests. That's kind of how I prefer to see it anyway.
And you know what? But go for it. I mean, I don't think there's a wrong answer here. I mean, as I said, many of us read it that way for a very long time. And just, used it as, this is another example of their culture, and this is what, and maybe even more about the enslaved person, sending these poor people out and finding out somebody gets killed, and maybe they do really believe in ghosts, I mean, or not.
And I think the really interesting thing is that everything's been pretty much cut and dry up until stage 7. And then you get this story that like nobody can figure out what. And that's really what gets your kids talking, because there are so many different ways you can look at it. And to me, that's what's really interesting about all of stage 7 in this particular story.
Well, and the first story, I mean, all of a sudden, as you say, it's been cut and dry, and then you have a guy, seeing someone who's a werewolf, and he takes his clothes off and they turn to stone, and now we don't know that he urinates around them, but that's in the Satyricon, and none of it makes any sense. And the kids are like, is this a werewolf? And I'm like, yeah, it is, So they already know that we're into a chapter of, Fabula Mirabilis.
Yeah.
I like this question, Michelle said. Follow the clues. What do all the clues lead us to deduce about what happened with Decans?
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean,
I think you can use it as a place to you do further close reading, right? So the kids go back into the story and try to figure out like what's going on. What do all the clues lead you to believe?
Right. Absolutely.
And that's what's so good. You know, we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but you know, when you get to stage 40 and you have that trial of Salvius, the most effective thing to do is, hey, students, here are some green books, here are some blue books. Go, you know, put them on trial, go find the evidence. You know, go back and revisit those stories. And so it's that same methodology. I like that a lot.
Another thing I think that we forget is, and when we had the Sandy and we lost power for so long, you know, even walking to my neighbor's house was really creepy at night. And I was the one like minding the house for a reason. And I have my flashlight and I would go like this to try to get like light in front of me. So saying to the kids, you know, yes, they did have, you know, things burning, but it's not a city street, or you don't have the moon and all the other, well, you could have the moon, but you don't have all the other stuff giving you ambient light. So you can see why people are jumpy as they're leaving.
Yeah.
And here in Tucson, we have a light ordinance because we have so much astronomy and everything going on. So we're not allowed to have a lot of the lights. Like our city is so much darker than I think kind of your average
cool.
city. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
That's very cool, man.
Can I say it's one small detail, but I sort of forgot to say when we were talking about that perfect tense, but I have heard teachers talk about their students having difficulty with like ama way runt, right? How different looking that a runt is. And if you're having that thought too, it's like, okay, ama wit and, you know, ama bot and ama bont and all of that. But I do want to point out that, remember, this is about reading comprehension and recognition. And it's not about production, right? If it were about producing forms, yes, that would be a really hard one to remember and produce and spell correctly and all of that. But the students generally, when you're just focused on reading comprehension and recognition, that a runt is really helpful because it looks so different. This is,
Right,
I always find when we get into the subjunctive, and the first subjunctive we meet is like, you know, pluperfect, right? Ama was set. Students never have a hard time with that because it's so weird looking, you know? So anyway, I just another kind of coda to go back to, remember, we're focusing on comprehension and recognition and reading than production.
I know some teachers get a little freaked out about the words that don't really change, or the vowels quality changes. And I just think you can make yourself crazy about that, or you can just let them kind of evolve and show up and you know, realize sometimes again that the two verbs on either side of it are perfect, and this one probably is too, you know.
Yeah.
Because the more I made a fuss of that stuff, the less it helped. Which is kind of crazy.
That's a great way to put that, Ginny. Thank you. That's a better way to say what I was trying to say. Yeah, absolutely.
What is this Mama Jama form? Joanna.
I wonder, she might not be able to
Find her.
Yeah.
No, I just think, you know, it's such a big form. Like there's no other word that ending that's 5 letters long. And so I'm like, this should be the easiest one to find because it's that's my word for big old ass form, you know, like, like look at this big old thing. So it's easy to spot. Yeah,
So
Mama Jump.
for the you know 5 to 7% of my students who are the grammar geeks like me, I point out, hey, all that is sunt. That's exactly where that comes from. It's sunt with the rhoticism of the S changing to the R between the two vowels. And those, the grammar geeks, and I mean, it just, you know, it just blows their minds. Like, what? You know,
I like that stuff.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you so much for attending this evening. Thank you, Patrick, for another outstanding presentation.
Absolutely.
I hope all of you came away with some fresh new ideas on how to approach this. And please know that we're all here to help you any way that we can. So whatever questions you may have now or in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Training@cambridgelatin.org, and you've got Patrick's direct email there on the screen.
Thank you, everybody, so much for coming. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you. Good
Well,
night.
late day.
Walete.